Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and stream, and we would also like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Flynn, and I'm joined by the fantastic Kitiya Palaskas. Hi, Kitiya, how are you?
Hello, Flynn. I'm well. How are you? I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we're excited to have you here. I'm pumped. This is a very exciting day for us. Finally got you on Adobe Live, and we're going to hang out. We're talking craft-based design. I love this title, craft-based designer. That's who you are and what you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as we kind of get into this?
Yes, absolutely. Craft-based design, first and foremost, is a title that I came up with myself. I'm pretty sure no one was using it before, but I never know.
Nice.
To describe what I do, which is essentially I'm a designer that works in the commercial design industry for commercial clients, but everything that I do and make is handmade and made with my two hands, and tactile and physical. And so there's a really interesting, I kind of like bridge the world of craft and design. That
Perfect.
makes sense. But I thought maybe I could show you some of my work to kind of give people who haven't come across me before an idea of the kinds of work that I do.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right.
Whenever you're ready, we can do some show and tell. Check it out. I love your
Yep.
work, so I'm excited.
I'll share my screen.
I can see it now. Here we go. So now we can
Okay.
all see your screen here. So this is KitiyaPalaskas.com, I believe.
Yes, it
Yep.
is.
Cool.
So we're here on my portfolio just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that I do. So I've been running my own craft-based design practice now for the past 12 years. I started off in the world of fashion. I had my own fashion label, and it kind of evolved into what it is today through me finding this really unique niche within the fashion industry for stylists, creative directors, and art directors, creating bespoke props, installations, costume pieces, objects, and images for their photo shoots. And at the time when I first started out 12 years ago, nobody was really offering this niche service of handcrafted things for commercial design projects like ads, window displays, events, and that kind of thing, editorial. So I was really able to carve a niche for myself and get some big clients early on. I can talk more about that later if anyone's interested. But basically, what we now are a design studio. So we are a team. We are based in Melbourne, and we specialize in things like illustration and graphic design, which is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today in this session. Here's some of the tactile, handcrafted illustration that we have created here in the studio. We also specialize in prop and installation design. So large scale is our favorite. We love large things, but we also love mini things as well. So we've done work for a lot of big clients globally, a bit of costume design, and also a huge component, especially since the pandemic, has been DIY content creation. So helping brands sell their products, grow their brands, and tell their brand story through interesting and innovative like DIY content.
Yeah, it's
So that's kind of
cool.
what we do. I'll just show you. This is my Instagram. Feel free to give me a follow. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of work on here that we've done as well. So, we've done work for Officeworks, for example, showing how you can use products that they sell in their store. For those that maybe aren't from Australia, it's a stationery store. Giving inspiration and innovative ideas for how people can use a brand's product is kind of what we specialize in for content. But as you can see, there's a lot of different kinds of work that we do. Our work is very eclectic, but it all falls under the umbrella of craft-based design. So, yeah.
And so much color.
Yes, color is something that we specialize in. I am a huge lover of color, which is really interesting because I used to be a goth when I was in high school, and in my early art school days, I was a goth. So yeah, now I'm very colorful, not goth at all. But yeah, I just love color. It's a huge inspiration for me, and I love pattern and mixing lots of different colors and patterns together. So that's my vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Might jump back now into. I'll stop sharing for a second.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you're safe. There we go.
Here
We've got a couple of like special cameras and things set up for everything today. So Bear with us as we navigate through. That was super smooth, by the way, Kit. We like killed that. So we're doing really well so far.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, one other thing. I've got some show and tell here. So like
oh,
this is a beer can label I designed. I don't know if you
awesome.
can see that, but it started off as a paper craft collage, and this is kind of what I want to talk about today is my paper craft illustrate and felt crafted illustration techniques and how I kind of put that things together to form a digital endpoint, but with a whole bunch of analog and digital steps throughout the process.
That's so cool. Yeah, fantastic. Well, as we're rolling through, just a reminder, if you're watching this over on YouTube or you're watching this on Behance Live, throw any questions you have in chat as we're rolling along. And if you're watching the replay, we hope you enjoy the replay. So do you want to get stuck into the craft cam? I'm so excited we have a craft cam.
Let's turn the craft cam on.
Let's do it. I'm just so excited about this. Let's check it out. This is so cool.
Here we go.
Not my head big. Let's make craft cam big.
Welcome to my desk. Please don't judge the edge of my desk, which I cut myself. I can't cut things in a straight line, as you'll see. So here's
Wait,
my
hang on. Can't cut things in a straight line. Craft-based designer. What's that about? You just like to just do it all freehand and.
I need to use rulers because my hands just want to be free cutting things, and so all of my shapes end up being really organic and a little bit like dodgy around the edges and stuff, and I think that's what really defines my style. But if you asked me to cut something in a straight line without a ruler, it wouldn't be straight. But I guess that's what I think that kind of says a lot about like me as a designer. I know how to be technical, and you have to be when you're building props. You need to know about measurements and dimension and all that kind of stuff. But in my free form creative self, I'm just going to take out the materials and start making stuff and see what happens, as opposed to like, I'm going to follow a strict pattern. I think I'm a little bit rebellious in that way. So when given the choice, I will most likely free form make something and then work out all the dimensions and stuff after that.
Yeah. See, that's quite cool, like, for me to hear, like, classically, the, design approach or advertising approach, that's quite methodical most of the time. But this kind of flips everything on its head, right? Like, it's more into that art side of thing, like being creative and being in the moment, free-forming, and then capturing all of that and then applying it to a commercial project. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but it seems very liberating.
When we are in production mode, we do work in a very methodical way in like an assembly line kind of format. But when I'm coming up with ideas and generating like pieces in an experimental way, I try to free myself from like the chains of measurements and like specifics and technicalities. I just like to let the materials guide me, I guess. Yeah. But then, it all gets tightened up, obviously, when you're going to produce something for a client, because it has to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's super cool. I'm sure we'll get stuck into that even more. I've got so many questions about that, but let's check out this cool craft cam that we've got cooked up.
Okay. I guess I kind of wanted to talk about the way that I do things in my studio. I like to call my, I guess, like illustration design style drawing with scissors. So I've always been the kind of person that has it in my head that I can't draw. So if you saw my sketchbooks, they're just stick figures and like things like that. I've never been the kind of person that can draw realistically. Even though I've taken many classes on it, it just didn't feel like me. And so I get intimidated with a pencil in my hand. It doesn't feel natural to me. However, if I have a pair of scissors in my hand, I can just cut anything. Like all of these things were cut freehand. I have a lot more confidence cutting shapes, and it's like my style flows through the scissors in a way more authentic way than it does when I try to draw it first. So my approach to illustration is drawing with scissors. I will cut shapes out of paper that form the different elements of an illustration, like the beer can, for example. And that's how I will start off a design. And then I go through a process when I'm designing it starts off with shapes. I then take photos of or scan in the shapes into Illustrator and turn them into vectors. This is a really interesting and long form way of doing things. And I'm sure there are other more quick and efficient ways of doing things, like, for example, creating the piece in Illustrator to start with. But for me, I feel like I need that connection with the scissors and my hand and actually physically cutting the paper for my style to really show.
Yeah.
So, but obviously, you know, when you're making things, you need to, like, especially if you're doing, for example, like multiple props that all need to look the same, you kind of need to operate on a sort of assembly line process, and you need to make multiples of things that look exactly the same. So there needs to be an element of uniformity between your things. You can't just freehand cut this exact flower shape 50 times.
Yeah.
So this is where my kind of digital process comes in. Everything starts off as a single shape cut from scissors, and then I'll scan it or take photos of it and put it into Illustrator, turn it into a vector, and then I can combine that with other shapes that I have previously cut out and scanned in and vectorized to create compositions like this one, for example, that then can become a finished piece. I will then send, after I've created the finished piece, and this is a good chance also to get a client to approve something in mock-up form without me having to like make a full mock-up. After I've like composed the design or whatever it is that I'm actually working on, I will then feed it into a little machine. Do you want to see the machine? I'll show you.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's check it out. I got a question for you after we've seen the machine too.
So here's my digital cutting machine.
Right.
It's called a Cricut. Some of you may be familiar with this machine. So you can feed SVG files from your computer, which are basically, it's like another form. Once you've got a vector, you can save it as an SVG file, feed it through.
Yeah, just straight out of Illustrator, right? You can
straight out of Illustrator, and then it will cut all of your shapes out for you. So it actually makes it really handy when I'm creating, like, for example, sometimes I'll need to make 100 piñatas with detailed collage on them for a client. And so I'll need to create the exact same thing multiple times. I did a job for Uno. Can I jump back into my portfolio and I'll show you?
Yeah, we can.
Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I think, yeah, we'll do this.
So see these piñatas here. Let's open this up. So I had to create, they're handmade, but I had to create 100 of the motif, and it was, you know, Uno, it's a logo that's highly recognizable, so it has to be specific. So I worked with vector shapes and cut them out on my digital cutting machine. I can jump back into the normal screen now, Flynn.
Okay.
Or the craft cam. Yeah, so I use my digital cutting machine to make multiples of the things that I then hand assembled. So a lot of the time I combine hand cut shapes with, like, you know, vectors that I've already created to form my illustration designs. And then I will cut them out on my machine and then recompose the image or the illustration by hand, and then photograph it, pop it back into Illustrator, edit any sort of blemishes or, you know, irregularities to make the image look really crisp and perfect. And then that gets sent off as the finished file to be turned into something like a beer can design, a poster, whatever it is. And yes, I know that's very convoluted, but it's sort of a process I've developed over the years that I feel really comfortable with. And it might take a little bit more time, yes, but it does allow me to be as hands-on as possible at many stages of the design process. So
yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I mean, we were talking about style before, and style is something that, you know, is very difficult for people to find. And once you've found it, it's a good thing to hang on to it, especially if there's clients willing to pay for it. I imagine, like, probably through your posting on Instagram at the very least, but I imagine there's a degree of taking your clients along this journey and demonstrating the steps. I imagine that that's an important part. And I imagine as a client, they probably get really excited about it as well.
It's very true. And I think also it's crucial that I do capture a lot of these sorts of moments, like behind the scenes, actually making things throughout the entire making process, because being such a niche service that we offer here at my studio, it's not often understood by clients, like how much handmade stuff costs. So it's like a constant process of having to educate potential clients on the value of handmade and why, for example, a handmade prop needs a bigger budget. If you want handmade props in your campaign, you might need to set aside a bigger budget than you would for just, standard sourced purchased props that a stylist might come up with, because everything is bespoke and one-off and made by hand. And so in order to get them to understand that, so that they don't freak out when I send my quotes and and they do have budget for projects, a lot of this behind the scenes stuff needs to be shown and talked about and constantly reinforced, just to keep people educated about like the value of handmade.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of questions from chat. If you've got questions as we're rolling along, I will get to them eventually. Sorry, just geeking out a little bit with Kit here. But so Bella asks, is there any craft material that you don't like or refuse to work with?
So funny that's a great question. I was actually just talking about that earlier today with my assistant Victoria, that I can't do crochet or knitting. Like I've tried so hard to be good at crochet and knitting, but I'm not. I just can't. I don't know. There's something about my brain that doesn't understand the instructions. And I also am quite impatient. I've realized, even though I spend hours and hours and hours on the one project, because that's what we have to do here. I don't know. There's something about knitting and crochet that I'm really impatient about. I want immediate results, and that doesn't give that to you. And I think that's something so that's one thing that I don't enjoy. But yeah, maybe because it's very technical. Like maybe you have to know, the instructions are very technical, and if you get the calculations wrong, the whole thing goes out of whack. So maybe that's why I don't like it.
Yep.
Yeah.
We also have another question, this one from Johanna. Thanks for the question, Johanna, also who is going to be geeking out as our host on Thursday, by the way, so she's going to have a great time. Set in between a pencil and scissors, do you use an X-Acto blade much, or do the scissors reign supreme?
I do, actually. So here are some of I put a little array of tools that I might use on a regular project. So the X-Acto knife is really good for really precision cuts, or if I need to cut holes out of a shape, for example, on a Monstera leaf, or if, maybe in that little section there, I might use an X-Acto knife for that. You can really get details with that kind of thing. Or if I'm cutting out letters, for example, if there's typography in my design, like with this here on the beer can, I used a cutting knife to do those. But then there's these smaller scissors for going around tight curves. I find that it's really helpful to have something small and sharp. But in general, if I'm just cutting broad, free form shapes like these ones that I'm doing right now, something like this is okay. But I also I've got over 50 pairs of scissors.
Yeah, so you're like a chef, basically.
Yeah, these are my knives.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I thought I'd explain what it is I'm doing here right now. Cool. So I just came back from an artist residency on Magnetic Island, and it was really inspiring. And there was just beautiful tropical nature everywhere. And there was this amazing makerspace outside. It was like an indoor-outdoor kind of thing. And I sat outside with these tropical palm trees and everything, vines, and I just cut shapes and collage the whole time. So these are some things that I cut inspired by some of the nature I saw on the island. And this was kind of inspired by some of the ornaments that were in my room that I was staying in on the art residency. So I thought I might like to design a poster or something like that today that incorporates some of these fresh cut elements, but also some existing vector shapes that are jungly that I have cut in the past to form, I guess, a full illustration that I might turn into a tote bag print or a poster or something like that or a print that I could sell.
Oh, that's really cool. And is that a common thing for you, taking inspiration from where you're going, where you're at? Do you see something and think, oh yeah, cool, there's some really interesting foliage here. It's a bit different to where I live in Melbourne or Victoria. I'm not sure. Melbourne, right?
Melbourne,
Victoria?
yes.
Yeah, Melbourne. And the environment is very interesting. Do you take photos I know you don't
Yeah.
do a sketch because you talked about drawing before, but
I never sketch.
Yeah.
But I take so many photos. Like, I think for me, inspiration, it's really important to try and find inspiration from sources that like are not social media and other people's work on the internet. As much as I'm really inspired by the work of my peers and other designers around the world, and I admire their talents and their skills, yes, I get inspiration from them. But when it comes to like coming up with original ideas, I try to find inspiration from outside in the real world, whether that be, like I said, nature things I see, maybe a combination of color or pattern that I've seen out on my travels, maybe even smells or sounds, experiences. So like travel experiences and stuff like that are very inspiring as well. The way I think about it, if you are sourcing inspiration from somewhere that you have originally experienced, just you in your own unique way, so everybody sees things differently, everyone smells differently, hears differently, etc., then the output, like the design output at the end of that inspiration process, is going to be highly unique because it was your unique experience.
It has to be because of the source. I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. And I think that's a danger that a lot of because we're obviously inundated with other people's work. You open up Instagram and it's just like incredible work. If you follow those types of accounts, it's an endless supply.
Yes.
So it can be important to look outside of that space, because even subjectively you can be influenced by everything that you see there.
So true. And like, you could be out walking with a friend and you could both see like something, let's just say an amazing flower, and you both love it. But the end product of using that flower as inspiration could be absolutely different from one to the other. Like, one person might decide they're going to turn that into a beautiful embroidery and their style is different. And then maybe I'll turn it into a large scale prop version of a flower, like the one that we see in the background there in my studio. Like two completely different things, even though you saw and experienced the exact same thing. And I just think that's really interesting. But when you do look to other people's work as inspiration for your work, it's okay to do that, but also you have to be wary of whether the style that whether you're just emulating their style and not putting your own spin on it, or whether, you might even accidentally imitate them without realizing it because, you got the inspiration just from seeing their work and not something original.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't know. I've got all these folders on my phone filled with inspirational photos. And I mean, photography was the first thing that I studied at university before I switched into a different faculty that would let me be a bit more experimental and use mixed media.
Right.
So I've always had a really strong passion for photography and I love it. I don't really, unless it's just posting on stories on my travels, I don't really share a lot of my photography work, but I do love it a lot. And so, yeah.
But I've seen like examples of, like, I'm assuming a lot of your work you've photographed yourself.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah, all of it. Okay, so like that's so valuable because it's very difficult actually, I think, to photograph your work if you don't know what you're doing.
Yes.
Like everything from lighting, or if you're doing any post editing and things like that, how to make the colors look right on screen. It can be difficult to do. So it's obviously like serving you very well. I'm realizing you're this, like, I know, like multi-discipline creative, like you've done all these different things to kind of end up where you are now, but they all seem to kind of add to
Line.
Yeah, like really kind of build into the area that you're in. So when did the craft-based idea kind of hit you? Has it always been, I've always loved to do craft. Can you imagine if I got paid to do this? Wouldn't that be incredible? And then there's always the jump, right? Like, so what's that story? I want that story.
So I always loved craft, but I always just thought this is just a hobby that you do because you love it. There was no education or like no one to really sort of encourage me to think outside of the box, like I could turn it into a career at first. So I was always really crafty growing up, and I went to art school, as I said, but like after that, our art school didn't really prepare us to be entrepreneurs or to like monetize our skills. So we kind of left art school a bit like innocent and naive about how you actually become a professional artist or designer. We didn't really have any skills. I didn't know even what an invoice was, or like
Yeah.
what
No, I'm with you. I was the same.
all of that stuff, like or even what kinds of, business structures I could do or whatever. So I felt a bit lost, but all through my younger life, I would make things, like crafted things. Wow, I don't really know what's happening to this it's a really weird plant I'm currently making. This is what happens when you're talking and like free form cutting at the same time. Some really weird things come out, but we'll see what we can make here. But yeah, so I was always making stuff. In high school, I would make all these things like beaded necklaces, screen printed T-shirts. We did hair wraps and friendship bracelets and stuff, and we would sell them. Me and my best friend would sell them at like the school fairs. So we were little budding entrepreneurs, but we just like didn't know that that's what that was.
Right.
So after school, when I graduated from uni, it was like the first year of Etsy. So Etsy was like brand new, and the idea of having this platform that could easily allow you to like create an online shop and sell specifically for makers was huge, especially because at that time online shopping was quite a different landscape to what it is now. And in Australia, it was really hard to actually like I remember having to order stuff online from America and then have it sent to like my friend in America and then have her mail it to me because they wouldn't ship to Australia.
I mean, that's still the case for some things. But yeah, I remember that time as well. You used to have to, for those that don't know, in Australia, yeah, that was totally a thing because it would only ship to, you couldn't buy a particular product from an American website and get it shipped directly to Australia. But if like a friend or something boxed it up and shipped it to you, that was perfectly fine. Maybe it was a customs thing or something. I don't know. But
there was just not I even feel like shipping partners and stuff like FedEx and all that stuff were not set up for international yet because online shopping wasn't a big thing. So I opened an online store. I thought wow, that is really weird. I thought that I wanted to be a fashion designer at that stage because I loved making my own clothes. So I set up my own fashion brand and selling at markets and on Etsy. And I was able to really gain a lot of traction from that because nobody else was making clothes on Etsy at that time. So I could really stand out. There was so few people selling on there. It was very different to how it is today. So that's how I started. But because I thought, okay, well, if I want to be in the fashion industry, I should get some more experience working in commercial fashion. So I started assisting like a stylist, and she would get me to create. She knew I really liked to craft, and for her shoots, she would get me to create like bespoke pieces. So little props or costume elements, or maybe something for the set to make her shoots more eclectic and stand out. And it was really then that and she helped me to kind of see that I could monetize like this weird, unique niche thing. Because she would get me to she would recommend me to creative directors and stylists and artists and other people she was working with. And that's how I kind of started getting a client base. But it wasn't until, like a few months into doing that we both were just kind of like, wow, is this a thing? I think this is a thing. And then she said, you should probably start, putting stuff in your folio. You should start photographing all your work. And that's where the whole newbiness of not knowing anything about business really hit me. Like I didn't even know what an ABN was, which is an Australian business number for anyone not from Australia. But, I really had to learn on the fly. My first huge job for, I guess, a proper client was creating the costumes for an Australian band's film clip. And
cool.
I had to meet with the director and the band and the production designer and all these big people. And they were going on and on about deliverables and when would they be delivered. And I didn't even know what a deliverable was. I had to go outside and Google it.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And just thrown into these situations where you just kind of fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Was what I had to do at the start. But yeah, it always just felt too good to be true. And I have to say, it still kind of does. 12 years later, it feels like, oh my God, I just get to sit here and cut out leaves all day. Whoa, that's a job. It's a real job.
Well, it's great. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that, also have the niche or the thing that they're really interested in, thinking, how can I build that into a career? How do I take something niche and, you know, make it the one thing that I do, and then really delve into that. We actually have a question kind of along those lines from Bella. How do you accurately quote for a project where you're using a new medium or technique without knowing exactly how it's going to go?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's a great question.
Real quick before I answer that, I just wanted to tell you that, so I've cut these little details out for these leaves here, but
Oh, yeah.
why cut them out, all of them, when I could just vectorize them and send them to my cutting machine and cut out multiples of them that are going to be the same to go on this finished product? So I just wanted to show you that, like I might cut a few examples out and then I will scan these little details in, vectorize them, and then create, for the rest, digital cutting. So that's just one example of how like analog mixes with digital.
Yeah, that's cool.
Back to your question, Bella, which is a great question. I try not to take on a project unless I have at least had time personally to experiment with the craft method first.
Right.
That's not to say that I haven't done that before, but every time I have done that without really being familiar with the material or technique that they'd like me to use, it's always been a disaster, because it takes so much longer than you would think when you're learning something new. Like last Christmas, I did a prop job and they were like, we want everything to be paper mache. And I had done paper mache many times in the past, but never for like large scale props. And the job ended up being a lot more punishing than it probably should have been, because I had to learn on the fly how to construct large scale paper mache things. So in hindsight, I probably would have tried to experiment with that technique to a confident level that I could add that to my services list or my, techniques list, and then confidently offer it as an option. But in terms of how to cost for different sort of craft-based things, a lot of it is like time and materials. So, I mean, costing is a whole huge conversation. But in terms of like how you figure out what paper cutting costs as opposed to maybe like building something from wood, it's all about having that knowledge and knowing how long it takes and how much the materials cost. And you can't really like quote on something accurately unless you've actually like physically tried it, because you just never know. So experimentation, I think, is the short answer to that question. Hopefully that's answered your question, Bella.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, it's always notoriously difficult when it comes down to like quoting. And I don't know, like from my years in education, it was always like, how much do I charge for X? And the answer is always it depends. There's so many factors that are involved.
Yes, a lot of clients want you to tell them up front, like, but how much does it cost for you to make 50 piñatas? To use the piñata example again, but it's like, I honestly don't know. How big are they? What kinds of materials do you want me to use to cover them? Do they need to be filled? When do you need them? Where do they need to be shipped? So all these things come into play for a physical item, and that can change the costing a lot depending on all of those factors,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, costing is something I still struggle with, to be quite honest with you, because there aren't that many people doing the exact same thing to like what I'm doing at the moment. So I don't really have a lot of others, like peers, to bounce off to. And there is sort of people do get funny sometimes about talking about money. And I think it's something that maybe needs to be a bit more openly discussed, because especially for people with unique career paths like me, how are you meant to know if what you're charging is the standard, or if there is a standard, if you don't communicate with similar people and ask, what are you charging? There's no job description for craft-based design and for a lot of creative pursuits or professions. And so there's no, in Australia, we don't have a minimum wage for craft-based designers. Right. So it's all very sort of cloudy, and you have to kind of, I think more open communication is key. But also, like, if a client knocks you back for a quote, maybe asking them, okay, what was it that in the like, what is it, the budget, or were you just really shocked by how much craft-based design costs? Trying to get a little bit of feedback from a client if they do say that they can't afford it is important to learning like what the perceptions of clients are when it comes to thinking about like a handmade design piece.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because you never know what's going on in the background.
They could have
What
just said,
they're
oh, you know what, like actually they've just decided to go with a digital illustration just because we need it really quickly, or you know, we actually just have decided we're scaling down this campaign. Well, you never know what it could be. It might not even be anything to do with you or your services.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that's very great. We are past the halfway mark, just letting you know, and chat as well. So feel free to throw questions in as we're rolling along. And I'm just terrified you're going to cut yourself just at 1 second, like because I'm interrupting you constantly. Like we got it. So I had a like experience at TAFE. Did graphic design at TAFE, and we had this one guy who was really good at cutting with the knife. And then of course he cut like a piece of his finger off once because he was so confident. And it's always terrified me, and I've never cut myself.
Am I making you really uncomfortable right now?
No, not really, because I know you're a pro. But there's something in the back of my head that's like, stop talking to Kitiya and just let her work.
No. I mean, it's second nature. Like, I mean, actually, this is really interesting. I want to know from those of you watching, how do you hold your cutting knife? Because I hold it like a pencil. So it feels more like you're drawing with it. Some people hold it like this, which I feel like doesn't have as much control, and that might slip. You know, I'm interested to know how different people hold their cutting knives. But for me also, I don't know if you've noticed, but like I always anchor with my little finger. And this is something that's really interesting that I've kind of learned from sign writing. So my partner is a sign writer. He does like traditional hand painted signs, and they have what's called a moss stick, which is like it's basically a stick with like a soft bit on the end that when they're painting, they can like put it up against a board to stabilize, and then they have something for their wrist to like lean on, so that when they're doing that, they're not just like having to stabilize themselves with their whole arm. They've stabilized themselves with this arm. So after learning that, now I always anchor like my little finger down like that, and that provides just a really, really stable thing to take the weight, so I can put more pressure on
That's
it,
so cool.
on the knife, and
like
then
picking
allow
up
it
something from a different field and applying it to yours. That's great. I just picked something up to see what it was like, and I would hold a knife the other way. So,
like this.
Yeah, that one.
This is how I would hold the knife if I was using a ruler and cutting like a straight line with paper. But when it comes to detailed design work like this, I find that holding it like a pencil with your anchor down is the easiest way to do it. And then you use your other hand to anchor the paper down. So you're holding it on either side. It's not going anywhere. So you're less likely to cut yourself.
Oh, that's cool. There we
go. Don't worry. Nice what I'm trying to say, Flynn, is don't worry. Okay. I'm not going to cut myself.
I have full faith. Here's a question from, hang on one sec. Annika is with me. I'm terrified of X-Acto knives. Yep. Oh,
Annika, I feel you. And you know, the ones that really scare me are the ones, I don't have an example here, but they're like the true scalpels that look like a medical device.
Oh,
Those ones are not fun.
Yeah. So there's a question from Johanna in chat again. Do you have any tips for finding your thing to stick to, or honing in on what might become part of a career?
Okay, great question. I'm gonna like just throw a curveball in and say, I don't think you should stick to any one thing. Okay. Like, yes, you might have your specialty, but I was actually going to bring this up before. I am like multi-passionate in terms of the kinds of things I want to do. Yes, I guess my brand has been formed around the idea of handmade and craft-based things, but under that umbrella are all these different interests that I have. So you'll see, like in my services on my website, we do props, we do installations, we do events, we do workshops, we do DIY content, we do illustrations and graphic art. We do, like packaging design, surface pattern design, book design, like all those kinds of things under the broad umbrella of craft. And I think I've always like been hesitant to niche down. I know it goes against everything we're always told, like find your niche all the time. Right. But I think that what pulls everything together for me and makes me cohesive as a brand, I think, is my aesthetic and my style. So like whether I'm cutting this with a knife, designing it on Illustrator as a vector, drawing it by hand, it's all going to be like my style. And so if I would focus more on defining your style, and yes, your style can change and evolve, but like that's what, and my use of color or, you know, things like that, that's what ties everything together, from whether it be a prop, whether it be a flat 2D image, whether it be a line like this, whether it be a hanging installation, like something like this, which is like a felt plant. All of that, when you look
That's
at
really
it,
cool.
it's me,
Yeah.
and that's because it's my style that's carrying it over. So I think if you're feeling a pressure to, you know, what's my thing, go a little easier on yourself, because it's okay to have more than one thing. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. There's a really good TED Talk and book actually by this. So the TED Talk is by this person called Emily Wapnick, Wapnick. She has a whole business about how to be like a multi-potentialite, is what she calls them, which is basically a creative that wants to do all sorts of different things and doesn't want to pick just one. And she helps creatives to find out how to lead successful careers without having to choose just one thing. And her TED Talk's all about, the whole concept of not choosing just one thing. And her book is called How to Be Everything. And it was very transformative for me because it was validating the way that I was feeling. I always used to feel that I was like a failure or was flighty or couldn't, you know, because I couldn't stick to one thing. But after learning and discovering that a lot of other people are like this too, I realized it's just a very specific personality trait, and it's like actually something to be celebrated and utilized rather than like feel stressed about. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, turning that kind of thinking into a strength, I think is really valuable rather than a weakness of, I'm jumping from this to that to the other. I can't find where I need to be. But actually being comfortable with, no, I'm interested in this and I'm interested in this, and finding out a way for that to work, like in a professional sense, would be very liberating, I would imagine.
It is. I just wanted to chat to you all about one more thing to do with this specific design. So as I was doing this, I was realizing, you know what, I'm bored of cutting these tiny holes in here now. So what I'll probably do with this one is I will scan it in and I'll put it in Photoshop and I'll just cut out the little holes, because I don't think it's necessarily as specific to my design, to stay true to my design style, if I just cut some slits out using a computer rather than, my knife. So that speeds up the process as well. So sometimes adding a little digital intervention in there helps speed up a making process for sure.
Yeah, I like that. You're just like, I'm over it. Let's move on to the next thing. I can just copy that bit. I love that. It's so great.
Yeah.
It's not about efficiency or anything. You're just like, I'm done. I'm done with that.
Yeah, I want to move on to, like, these other shapes were calling me and I was like, I've got to go over there now and do something with them. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I feel like I'm quite flighty. Like I like to switch. Maybe that's what being like a multi-potentialite is, switch between different things. Like maybe if I'm working on an illustration, I might get bored. And so I might have to switch over to something else for a little while and do that and then come back to the piece, unless I'm on a hectic deadline, in which case I have this kind of like machine mode that I go into, which allows me to just churn out the work until it's done.
Right.
Yeah.
We have another question.
Awesome.
I'm interested in this one too, Belle. This is some great questions that you've had today. Is craft-based design taxing on your body? I've heard muralists only get a few good years. So how do you look after yourself as a craft artist?
That is such a good question. That's something that no one's ever asked me before. Well, yes, like for example, that Uno Piñata project I showed before, that after that was done, I got RSI because of the repetitive, like sticking, cutting, like, and your hand at a weird like angle. There's been definitely for the large scale projects. Let me just see if I might jump over to my Instagram for a sec. Do you mind?
Yeah, go for it whenever you're ready, and then I'll flip us over.
All right, I'm in.
There we go.
So this here, this is a reel, so I'm not going to open it up, but you can see here that this was a project that had a huge installation that had 2,977 hand folded and assembled pink petals, right?
Oh my goodness.
So after that, like I had calluses and it really was taxing. So it does happen. For more one-off props, like for example, these Christmas props, every one of them was different, so it wasn't so bad. But yes, it is definitely a thing. I'll jump back over now. Flynn.
Okay.
Oops.
There we go.
Almost.
Almost.
So I think that allowing, after a big job like that, one, I will try to have production assistance, and that is possible a lot of the time, but sometimes if there's not budget for it, then I have to do it all myself. But that's when I would be sort of thinking like, is this the job for me? You know?
Yeah.
But if there is production assistance, I will outsource a lot of the physical labor or spread it out over my various assistants. And that really helps all of us to make in a way that is like kinder on our bodies. But if that's not possible for some reason, I will schedule in like recovery time after a huge project, because not only is it taxing physically on your hands and like your shoulders and that kind of thing, also mentally as well. And like if you have to stay up late and stuff like that, which I try not to do anymore. But in the early days, I would do a lot of all-nighters, which I'm not advocating at all because it's not good for you. But, you know, you have to schedule in recovery time. Also, I kind of get like, I don't want to say PTSD because PTSD is a very serious thing. And this is just craft. But it is a kind of like craft related trauma that I sometimes get from a huge project where I need to not make any craft for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks afterwards, after a huge job, so that I can just reset my brain and get away. But it's also like it can be a physically demanding job, but it can also be quite a sedentary job where I'm sitting down all day long. And so I try to go for walks, and this is something I'm still working on. Like, you know, break up the day, go stand in the sunshine, eat my lunch like downstairs outside, walk to work rather than drive to work, so that I am getting a bit of balance there as well. But yeah, it's constantly be on top of it. Like I always worry about injuring my hands. Oh, not good.
Yeah.
I always worry about injuring my hands because like that's my main tool is my hands. So
it's your bread and butter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even more so than because I got RSI once in my wrist from just using a mouse like constantly. That was not fun, but at least I could just still navigate the computer. Still just had to use a left-handed. It wasn't very efficient, but I could get by.
I always try to think about like what I would do. I would have to just get really good at describing things so I could like describe to other people how to do the cutting and stuff. But then it would be unfortunate because it's like my style is what is my brand basically. And if I can't communicate with using my hands, I don't know how I would do it. But you would adapt if you had to, I guess.
Yeah. Hopefully it won't come to that.
I know. I hope I haven't just jinxed myself.
So we have about 5 minutes left, by the way.
Okay. I might just show you now like what I would do to move into like the next phase. So let's just say I've cut all the things out that I want to use. What do I do now? So I don't scan because sometimes if the thing is like a collaged piece with layers, the scanner sort of doesn't really pick that up. So I usually just put it on a plain surface and just take a photo of, usually with not any direct lighting on it. So there's a lamp on, so it's not really the kind of lighting I would usually use, but I just take a photo of it against a contrasting surface. I then would upload that onto my computer and pop it into Illustrator, and I'll just jump across to Illustrator, Flynn, to show you.
When you're ready.
All right, I'm in.
There we go. Okay.
So
cool.
here are some that I prepared earlier. They are like fully vectorized things that I have that originated from paper. So there's like lots of different elements, and they were all originally paper. And as you can see, it's kind of got that rough kind of edge, but I have smoothed some things and cleaned them up a little bit in the vectorizing process just to make them a little bit neater and have less points, because when you put something into a machine, or if you're sending it to a laser cutter, for example, if you wanted to cut shapes out, the more points you have on something, the longer it takes the laser or the cutter to cut. And so therefore, the more expensive it's going to be in your production process. So smoothing it out.
Wow.
Yeah. So smoothing it out while still retaining some of the quirkiness of the hand cut feel, but not so many points, is really important. And that's where Illustrator comes in. So next time, we will be working on creating a design using all of our different vectors that I've sort of cut out today. And we'll be vectorizing some stuff. We'll be creating our design, and then we'll be feeding it into my machine. And I'll show you how the machine works to cut things out.
Very cool.
All right, I'm going to jump back in.
Okay.
Here we are.
Go.
Yeah,
we're just talking to each other, so we like try to get the transitions going down. We've done a pretty good job. I'm very proud of us, by the way.
Tiny slip up.
Yeah.
One tiny slip up. So that's basically what we're going to be doing next time. Going to be showing the next phase of this process and an end product from all of these paper cuts.
Very cool. I love this. I'm so excited about this process. We probably have a couple of minutes, and I do have a couple of questions. So maybe we'll just answer a couple of questions kind of as we finish up. Again, Bella with the great questions just around the budget stuff. Could you budget that recovery time to your quote? And then follow it up with, probably not as an actual line item. Yes, as I would definitely not recommend that.
I always try and build in a half day to a day buffer time in a project costing, because with craft, there's a lot of unknowns, or maybe like, the materials, because you're ordering in a lot of materials from different places, they might not arrive on time, or, there's lots of factors to consider. So buffer time allows me extra time for any like unexpectedness. But also then if I don't use that buffer time, then that's at least a little bit of time that I've costed in to recover after a project. But also in planning the kinds of work I'm going to be pursuing each quarter, each month, for example. I pay myself monthly, so I usually work on a month by month basis when planning stuff. I would try to only be scheduling in, like one huge production job a month, for example, and then a few other smaller ones, so that I can manage my time and allow for that sort of breathing space in between jobs. But then you get to the busy phases, like Christmas time or holiday season is always really busy for me, where you're getting all these great opportunities.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's a big time for me. That's where I would make the majority of my income, in the last quarter, in the October through December quarter of the year.
And is it because I can imagine in my head, but is it because of storefronts doing things, lots of advertising campaigns, there's just so much money going into advertising and marketing?
Yep. And also it's summer in Australia, so there's a lot of outdoor events.
Right.
Family events moving into the school holidays as well. So everything's just popping off, as they say.
Yeah. So you're just almost no Christmas parties or anything like that. You're working.
I usually work. I'm trying to change this bit by bit, but I usually work right up until the 23rd of December. 22nd.
Yeah. And for anyone outside of Australia, basically Australia just shuts down over the month of Christmas. So that's quite unusual. Try to get an email back from someone in the beginning of January. It's not going to happen.
No. And so I always use the start of the year then to do strategy and stuff, because I know that everyone's closed. It's a really nice time to take a breather and then strategize what I want the year to look like.
Yeah, it's when everyone relaunches their websites and updates their LinkedIn.
Every time. That's me every year.
New profile, headshot, clean the studio, all that sort of stuff. Hey, it's the best time to do it. Absolutely. Okay, cool. Okay, we'll finish with one silly question. There's a couple of other questions, but we'll roll those over to when Johanna gets to host on Thursday. Silly question: do you have a favorite pair of scissors?
That's such a good question. I was hoping someone was going to ask that, but I don't have them up here. I'll have to show you next time. But they are a pair of scissors that has 5 blades, so it can cut fringing. And I call them the thread saws, because you can just make all these shreds really quickly. And I'll bring them to the next session, so you'll have to come to the next session to see them. I'll show them in action at the next session.
We'll leave that as our cliffhanger. That's amazing. You're doing my job for me, Kit. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I've had a great time. Thank you so much, Kitiya. We will be back on Thursday. Well, it's Thursday, Australia time, but 48 hours from now at the exact same time, which is 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we hope you can join us.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
having
much.
me. Had so much
Thanks for
fun.
joining us. We'll see you all on Thursday for the next Adobe Live. Bye.
Bye.